Hello, everyone, and happy Wednesday. Welcome to this month's webinar, Prospecting for Diverse Major Donors. My name is Tony Bell, and I'll be your moderator today. I'm a trainer for the Sanford Institute of Philanthropy. Before we get started, a couple of notes. Please submit any questions you have in the chat box using your GoToWebinar control panel. In the days following the webinar, you will receive an email with the slide deck and recording to review again at your leisure. You've got a cause, learn how to fund it. At the Sanford Institute of Philanthropy, our mission is to significantly increase your fundraising capabilities and the impact you have on communities and society through a proven contemporary curriculum, presented by world-class nonprofit leaders, best-in-class faculty, and renowned philanthropists. We want to recognize our important affiliate partners who provide training and education to fundraisers nationally. Check out the map to find an institute in your community. If you're on social media, please give us a shout out using the hashtag #SIPWebinar and tag us. At the Sanford Institute of Philanthropy, we teach relationship fundraising based on our cause selling cycle. Here's an example of the cause selling cycle and the 3 phases of the cycle. Today, we're going to focus on prospecting. Now I'm pleased to introduce today's presenter, Armando Zumaya, Vice President, Development at Goodwill Industry and trainer for Sanford Institute of Philanthropy. Armando has been in fundraising for 32 years in a variety of roles that have given him a unique perspective on development offices, prospecting, and role of prospect research and management. He has spent the bulk of his fundraising career as a major gift, leadership gifts, and annual fund officer on 2 $1+ billion campaigns at Cornell University and the University of California, Berkeley. His 3 recent articles, The Crisis of Development Officer Short Tenures, Silent Service, and the Nonprofit Achievement Gap, has earned him national recognition. Armando lives in Northern California and is a proud alumnus of the University of California, Riverside, and Roosevelt High School in East Los Angeles. Welcome, Armando, and thank you for being here.
Thanks, Tony. It's good, good to hear from you, and thanks for that heavy-duty introduction. I feel like I better deliver now with all that stuff about me. Let's launch right in, because we have time for questions. And right here is our outline. Oops. And so the outline, I'm not going to go over it in great detail, but what we're going to talk about is a background to major giving, a background to diverse major giving, talk about cultural relevance a bit, and talk about specific techniques and methods for including and keeping diverse major donors. And great praise to the Sanford Institute for even having this webinar, because there's a lot of people will talk about fundraising. Not a lot of people will train on major giving. Very, very few will talk about fundraising and diversity. And almost nobody, to my knowledge, talks about diverse major giving. It's literally, people think of a major donor, they think of an old white man. They don't think of a woman. They don't think of a woman of color. They don't think of a gay person of color. They think of old white guys. So let's break that open. I've had personal and direct experience in raising 6- and 7-figure gifts from diverse peoples all over the country. So let's talk about how to get that done and the specifics of that. But first, what we're going to do is we're going to have a poll. Here's the poll, and it's based upon a slide that's coming up, and we want to get a sense of where all of you are at with this question. I'll let Tony take it over from here.
Sure thing, Armando. So the poll is, what do you believe are the most commonly underinvested areas of fundraising? Is it staffing and time, training, other resources, leadership patience, or all of the above? So a poll is going to launch on your screen, and please select your response. We'll review the results shortly after we close the poll. About 10 more seconds and we'll close the poll. Okay, great. Let's take a look at the results. Can you see those, Armando?
No, I cannot.
Not a problem. So let me share with you what the results are from our attendees. So again, what do you believe are the most commonly underinvested areas of fundraising? Staffing and time, 21%, training, 12%, other resources, 4%, leadership patience, 7%, all of the above, 55%.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, that speaks pretty loudly there that people have had issues, throughout time with all of these issues. Staffing and time obviously is the top one on the pile there. Thanks for that insight. That was awesome. Let's talk about specific issues with major gifts work. So whether you're diversifying your major gifts base or whether you're not, any type of major gifts work, we have to say some hard things about fundraising for major giving. Major giving is often the least understood, the most derided form of fundraising out there. Really commonly, people think of it as something slimy, you're dealing with rich people, you're whining and dining. There's a lot of negative imagery and conversations around major giving, unfortunately. And people do not overwhelmingly understand that it's the most powerful dynamic way to raise a great deal of money for almost any cause. But 70%, 70% of nonprofits out there do not have a major giving program. So that tells you it's not really well distributed. Unfortunately, it's really the purview of major hospitals, universities, museums, unfortunately, when it should be every nonprofit should have a major giving program, in my mind. So it's commonly underinvested in, just like the poll we just saw. And we can see from you guys that staffing and time is the #1 issue, but it's all of the above at the same time. And the other thing that's super crucial is you need to have a proper investment. You need to have a dedicated person to work on major gifts. In my mind, it can't be heaped on a large job description. There's also some specialty skills we're going to talk about in the major giving approach. So you also need board and leadership support. There's 2 types of board and leadership support in my mind. There's one where you think they support you, and there's one where they actually support you. So they have to understand the commitment of time and patience around this work. It is not uncommon to start a major giving program, hire a major giving officer, get your research done, and then have your board look at their stopwatch and go, okay, it's been 6 months, where's our money? Because the perception of a lot of people is that a major gifts fundraiser literally has some sort of magic Rolodex and can call 30 rich people, and they all pick up the phone, and they all want to meet, and they all want to write a check on the first meeting. Well, all of which is total nonsense and fantasy island. It doesn't seriously work that way. So we really have to dispel a lot of myths and create a cycle of understanding and patience around major giving work. So we also have to look at dealing with some of the misconceptions and prejudices around diverse major donors. So a really common situation I've seen is where I talk to an organization about their diversity of major donors, and you'll hear a board member say, well, those people, they're not really philanthropic, or, fill in the blank of an ethnic group. It's not in their culture to give. And it's something that's really self-perpetuated as fact, when often data and studies, practice show that's simply not true. There's a lot of data out there that show that Latinos, African Americans, Asian Americans are woefully under-solicited, under-asked, under-engaged because of cultural bias, because of implicit bias, because of myths like this that are out there. It's very common for people to have a perception of a community, of an ethnic group, of whatever, racial group inside the community that's based on hearsay and myth. So it's important to really study your community and its wealth. When I started working on for the arts in Los Angeles, everyone told me, I wouldn't say everyone, a lot of people told me that the Latino community, this was for a Latino arts institution, one, was not philanthropic, it wasn't in our culture. And two, they told me that the wealth there really wasn't really wealth. It was from Mexico, and the Mexican Americans didn't have wealth the way I thought they did. And so when I actually studied wealth and Latinos in the community, I found a great deal. I found it in law, I found it in construction, I found it in the food industry, I found it in entertainment, and that was just solid prospect research. So my data countered the myths. So you can think things about a group of people, but the data says different. You got to act on the data and throw the myths in the trash. Overwhelmingly in fundraising, not just diverse fundraising, overwhelmingly in fundraising, the missing piece is prospect research. If 70% of nonprofits don't have a major giving program, I'll bet you that 80, 90% don't have prospect research. And prospect research is a staffed profession. It's just like a major gifts officer or a foundation officer or prospect researcher. They have their own professional organization. It's APRA, APRA, and you can look that up. And prospect researchers find you, they're your lead generators. They find you major gifts prospects. So people ask me, how did you find all these rich African Americans in New York to give to this cause? And I said, well, I worked with a prospect researcher who helped identify people who had means and philanthropy, and that's all there was to it. It's not rocket science. The problem is, even with universities and hospitals that have prospect researchers, they often use them poorly. They make them into reactive people, not proactive people. Or they ignore the results of their research and operate on hunches and rumor and myths. So very few prospect researchers, I speak at APRA every year, are asked to address diversity. So answer the myth with hardcore data, So if you have more than 3 development officers, you should have a prospect research officer. If you can't get a prospect research officer, then consider a part-time person or hire a freelance prospect research officer. So I'm going to show you where to get those later on. But the classic question is, give me a list of Latinas who have businesses valued over $10 million in Los Angeles County who are philanthropic at $1,000 on up. I asked this question not too long ago from a prospect researcher for an organization, and they gave me a list of about 455 people. It's hard to believe, but true. So the data to show where the wealth is important. Also, with a lot of diverse people and people of color who are not engaged in philanthropy and are wealthy, you have to do an extra step often with them to introduce them to philanthropy. The gifts I've gotten that have been big have been from wealthy people who really haven't been engaged in the past and need sort of a 101 of philanthropy. That's been my experience at least. So when you hire a freelance prospect researcher, so if you're a small nonprofit and there's no way you're going to get your boss to hire you a staff person, you can hire them in 3 ways. There's a LinkedIn website for the Freelance Prospect Research Association. Just post on there and say, hey guys, I need somebody. Prospect L is the APRA listserv. So you can join the listserv and ask prospect research questions on there. There's 4,000 researchers on there. And then finally on my website, there's a free list. I don't charge them, they don't charge me. It's just free to put people to put listings there. There's about 20 different prospect researchers, freelancers up there right now and growing. And also you can, to understand prospect research more, you can check out their website. That's their website. But this is crucial because if you want to find people of color who are wealthy, who and philanthropic and may care about your cause, this is probably the best way to start to do that. Okay, so let's take a look at your board. And there has to be, I call it the look in the mirror, where the board looks in the mirror and says, you know what, we're not diverse. We don't look like the community. And so when you have, if you're lucky enough to get in front of, let's say, an African-American woman who's very wealthy, and you sit down with her and you tell her about your organization, first thing she's going to look at is your board. And if there's nobody she knows, if it's not diverse, you already have a knock against you. So it's really important when you start to do diverse prospecting, the first thing you've got to do is diversify your board, because people look at financials and they look at the board. That's the first thing a major gifts prospect looks at least in my experience. Maybe some of you old timers like me can do that. So literally you should create through prospect research a large list of diverse candidates who are philanthropic, who give to causes similar to your organizations, and work to recruit those people the way you would a board member. I ask for a 7-to-1 ratio in candidates, because you're going to get 6 no's for 1 yes. And you want to look also for overlapping people. So if you need more diversity, you may be able to cover other issues on your board like law or public relations, or some things that are specific to your nonprofit's issues they work on, and that person's diverse. So they may be like sort of a twofer. So create a staff and board partnership, and create a list of good candidates you can vet through the board, and work with your board to diversify and recruit new diverse board members. So it's really important. The first thing you do is you work on even a little bit of diversity on your board, so you can look like your community. That's what if you're in Nebraska, or if you're in Florida, if you're in New York, wherever you are, diversity looks different in every community. So you want to look like your community. Let's see here. So this is the classic question, and you really don't need that. It would be nice in lots of instances, but I've seen lots of nonprofits diversify their boards with a Caucasian woman asking a black man, for example. It's not the end of the world. It would be nice for cultural, relevance and affinity, but it's not the end of the world. So let's talk about cultural relevance. Did I sing that? If I sang that, I'm really sorry. God. Who sings "Let's Think About Cultural Relevance"? I don't know. I'm such a dork. So,
And all of a sudden, you've turned this into American Idol.
I know, it's awful. I'm sorry. I don't want to see the scores for me. That'll be really depressing. So cultural relevance means how are you approaching people in their culture? Different cultures have different approaches, and it may be different by your region. Latino communities all across the country are really different. Mexicans are very different from Puerto Ricans in New York. And you have to understand, one of the best ways to start this, to approach a community, is understand their leaders, and if they do have known philanthropists, to sit down with them. When I did that in the arts here in San Francisco, and I noticed there wasn't a lot of giving from the Asian community here, I identified fairly easily major leaders in the Asian community here, and went and had conversations with them about, hey, why aren't people giving to the opera? They seem to attend the opera. And I reached out to a lot of their leaders. And so people love that. People love the outreach. Understand your organization's history with that, or lack thereof, with that group of people. And also, understand some of the subtle cultural differences around money and giving. So for example, Latinos are very family focused in terms of giving. Will often include sisters and brothers, and spouses, and they need more consensus giving. When I've solicited large Latino families, there's 3 or 4 people involved in the gift, not just the individual and his spouse. So it's a little off-putting, and you think, what's going on here? But that's kind of the way we work when it comes to large amounts of money, even if it's a business thing, I imagine, too. Also, look for business leaders, too, not just religious leaders or political leaders, but folks who are making money in the business community. And, religious leaders, but also, too, understand the role of women. We all want to promote women's philanthropy. So understand how women in different cultures are viewed, involved. My view is always to be progressive and to involve women, even if it's culturally challenging, shall I say, the word challenging, because I really don't want to play that game, shall I say that? Yeah, I'll say that out loud. All right. So I don't want to, continue to have women in a situation where they're considered second partners, when that's not often not the case. So there's the main situation you've got to look at here is creating new major gifts philanthropy. I mentioned this before. It's great if you have a diverse annual small donor base. This is the optimal way to build your donor base for diverse candidates for major donors. This often is not the case, unfortunately. I'm really sorry about that, because people, if you look at and are able to understand your annual donor base, you'll see that it is not diverse generally. Now, maybe yours is, and that's great. And you can do research on your donor base and see who has a lot more capacity to give. So the funky thing I found with some of my 7 and 6 figure major donors, and we're talking about successful, well-educated people, they are not used to philanthropy. And it's not because they're jerks, it's not because they're ignorant, it's because their alma maters, other institutions ignore them or look past them for whatever freaky reason, implicit bias. I'm no expert on why they're ignored, but often I will be the first development officer to sit down with a Latino millionaire, and that happens. And so what they don't want to tell you is, I don't know how this works. And you kind of had to bring up that subject. So I tell people, I need you to be a leader in the community. Here's how, socially this works. I do create it as part of, if people are new to the country, especially, I do craft it as a profoundly American thing. Philanthropy is. It's now spreading all over the world. But I do believe philanthropy is one of the greatest contributions, the U.S. has ever made. Also, I identify clear ROI in projects. A lot of people who've made their money on their own, small business, well, small is relative, but they're scrappy. They weren't born rich. They worked their way up from nothing. Often people who were poor originally, they want to see ROI in their giving. They want to know that, okay, if I give this, I get this result. Sometimes that's hard in some of our institutions, but that's preferable if you have programs you can shop to them. And finally, there's public relations. People do like being thanked and being recognized more than a lot of non-diverse donors, shall I say, Caucasian donors. So you really have to introduce philanthropy. When one of my 7-figure donors, he literally said to me, so what sort of recognition do I get for this? And I had to explain to him, so how much do you understand about what we're doing here? We walked back and walked back and walked back, and I explained to him how the gift works, what it goes to, who gets to know. And, it was like 1A, and this guy was worth over $400 million. So that's an interesting insight into this kind of work. So let's talk about matriculation. Look at the little dancing people there. I didn't see that before. That's pretty cool. That's pretty fun. Or they're getting up from hot seats. One of the two things. I can't tell. But so I guess that's supposed to be music and TV, right? Or something. Festivals and fairs. Yes. That's pretty cool. So matriculation is super important. And this means, how do you move people forward from your annual donor list? And are you reaching out to diverse donors through unique different methods that we often don't use for Caucasian donors. So first of all, is your website translatable? Are there multicolored people on your website? And like we said before, is your board, diverse? So if someone's Cantonese and they speak Mandarin or Cantonese and they go to your website, are they going to be a fish out of water, or are they going to be super comfortable seeing people that look like them, seeing translations? Is it going to be something where they're kind of alien in this situation, or they're welcome? Okay, and I see the mouse moving around. That's funny. And so with Latinos, for example, where the bulk of my experience is, online and social media are surprisingly effective. Radio, unbelievably effective. Latinos still listen to radio a lot. And music and TV, unfortunately, celebrities is a big thing. A good model to look at is St. Jude. St. Jude Children's Center. Take a look at how they solicit Latinos. They earn hundreds of millions of dollars from Spanish-speaking donors every year. And some of these methods are theirs. If you go to a Mexican-American grocery store in the Bay Area or Los Angeles, when you check out, they're going to ask you in Spanish if you want to support St. Jude. If you turn on the local ranchera radio station, the DJ will be telling you about St. Jude. If you go to their website, there's a picture of a hunky movie star with a kid from St. Jude. And if you open your mail, there's a Spanish language with a Latina talking to you about her child and how St. Jude saved him. So St. Jude's on it. So they've realized what a lot of businesses realize, that the Latinos have a lot of money to give. And finally, are you at festivals and fairs with people who speak the language or are culturally relevant? If you're a health organization, this is really important to reach out to the community. So know these different angles and avenues of approach for diverse communities, and try to understand them in your community and how to use them. When I worked in the arts for Latinos, radio was a big deal for me. We started, I'm not sure we finished it, a text to give campaign using DJs, for example. And so that was a really innovative method. And also too, we were going to do a major concert with Latino superstars around the museum. So you want to develop a prospecting list, and the prospecting list is your method for networking and for volunteers. So it's a very simple list. You don't have to have a ton of information. You can literally use Excel to make it. It's literally name, company, town. And this is, you want to keep this list. You don't want to email it to anybody. This is a list you show to people. So your prospect researcher produces a list of, let's say, 100 wealthy Latinos in New York City who give to the arts. I'm just making this up. And so you want to get to these individuals so you can take to any board member, staff, donor, and take this list with you and show it to them and say, well, who do you know, on this list? Who can you introduce me to? This is just simple classic networking to get into some of these people, this is especially relevant for diverse communities when you're outside of the community, when you're not part of this community. So that's why it's super important to do good networking and you become slowly infiltrating it, for lack of a better word. And you put all this information, sure, you can put it on your prospect list. You have an action list, which is your own private list with all the notations, but you want to put it also in a database, of course, and keep this information. So you have, your prospect list based on research. You have a name, you have a company, you have the town, if there's a company. And then your separate list has all of this information, plus your private list, plus contact information, who can introduce you, and your notes on this person. So I hope that makes sense. And we are going to take questions at the end, guys. All right. So I have the RE mateys a thing up there because I am a pirate when it comes to fundraising. Sorry about that, guys, if you're close to me. Because, I will look at other institutions. So let's say, for example, you're helping high-risk youth or at-risk youth. Who else is giving to that at similar organizations? Who's on their donor list? And how do you get contact information for those people? How do you get intros? What are your challenges in going to see those people? Do you need training in, major gifts prospecting, for example? So this is a classic source for new prospects. If you have a similar institutions working on a similar cause, you can often simply just, look at other institutions and who's giving, put up the pirate flag and go get them. So, it sounds awful, but it works. And when you're studying a donor list, hold on, there you go. When you're studying a donor list, you really want to look at that donor list with skeptical eyes. I hate to say this. But often, sadly, there's going to be diverse people on there, but they're going to be tokens. So you want to see people who are clearly successful or philanthropic. And so we love other board members who aren't wealthy people, academics, teachers, ministers. That doesn't mean they're worthless or anything, but for fundraising, we're looking for wealthy people. Look into other boards and see who is diverse and wealthy on other boards of similar institutions. Another thing is you want to look for people who are on prestigious boards, who are on multiple prestigious boards are often really good because these boards will have minimum gifts. So that'll tell you off the bat, these people understand philanthropy, they understand nonprofits, and they do give. So those are very valuable people to approach. So you can look at boards of other institutions for potential donors for your institution. And one of my favorite things, which I train on, is cold calling. So you got to call people cold, okay? That's just part of the job. You can learn from a colleague who knows how to do this is one of the best ways. I do cold calling training. There's a link at the end of this presentation where you can, get a webinar on that if you want, a recorded webinar. But you do have to learn how to do this. It is a skill set. And there's different specialized approaches for diverse groups. I found with Asian Americans, I name drop more than I usually do. I try to get into a high person from the start, and then I'll ask that person if I can use their name to name drop, and I will. People know each other and they trust each other. So if Chuck met with me, then Mary feels okay meeting with me, for example. And you want to also use, so we're talking about cold calling for initial qualification meetings. That's what we're talking about here. For the first meeting we get with them, not for, solicitation or anything like that. This is the first qualification meeting. We sit down with them, we tell them what we're doing, we tell them about our institution, and then we see if they're interested in supporting us or not. I always use large scale lists for prospecting. When you deal with prospect researchers, also be careful of the profile. So what the profile is a one pager on a prospect. The problem is it takes a lot of time to make and they're expensive to make. What you need is a list of people, hundreds of people to work through to reach a lot of these major prospects. So large scale prospecting, I'm going to be calling to 200-300 people to get down to like a dozen people who are good major donors, for example, after qualification meetings. So you can't do that with a profile. If you ask a prospect researcher or a freelancer for profiles, they can do, a dozen in a month when you need hundreds. So I hope that makes sense. A profile has all the details of their lives, has a picture of them. It's very nice. You get a profile when you have a major donor you're about to solicit or when you have the meeting, it's not for just cold calling people. I hope that makes sense. And that's pretty clear. All right, let me.
Yeah, Armando, that made a lot of sense. And I'm glad that you clarified because I was thinking too, cold calling, like you said, is probably one of the biggest challenges for fundraisers. And
Excellent.
I was wondering if most of your cold calling came from referrals or if they came from your prospect research. Now, I think you answered that.
Prospect research. Yeah, no, they're from research. Because referrals, you got a soft intro and you can say, Tony told me to give you a ring or Tony suggested I call you. That's nice. But often you're going to have, especially with diverse people who you don't have any relationship to their community, you're going to go in icy cold. And that's hard, but it's got to be done. Another method is small events. So especially with diverse communities, this is a safe way to introduce them to your institution. So if you're researching a neighborhood in Atlanta and you have a group of wealthy African-American folks, go for your best prospect and ask them to host a dinner for you. This is exactly what I did. Ask them to host a dinner for you and then come with your own list. Don't ask them for their friends. And you can do a lot of mission education. You make it free and accessible, super easy in their own neighborhood. Know the social structure of the community. So in this instance, it was a very finite community near Atlanta, and inviting the local minister, who was the leader in the community, getting his endorsement was really important. So I learned this from my host, that if I invite Mr. Washington, other people will come, because he's the most respected guy in town. He was 92 years old. I literally had to carry him into the event physically. And so that was something I learned culturally about this. It's a small town and an African-American thing. And so it was very cool. And a lot of people appreciated the fact that he was there and was endorsing what we were working on. So this was a small home event, and we did pure mission education. We followed up with people afterwards, didn't solicit them there, and people were thrilled to talk to us, and we got some good gifts right out of the beltway, right out of the gateway, excuse me, for that. So let's also look at some resources here. Let's see here, there it goes. There's some different websites. Muckety doesn't work as much anymore, but it's a good website for referrals. There's also a new one, which is RelSci, which is expensive, but kind of worth it. And there's other websites here. Open Secrets is a really cool website for political giving. You probably all know Wealth Engine, but Open Secrets will show you Federal Election Commission giving. And for people of color, this is a really cool website, because you're going to see a lot of people who say gave Obama $5,000 in 2008. And that's a really good indication of a minimum gift. And I say minimum because political gifts are impulsive. They're kind of knee-jerk, but generally they're going to be the lowest gift someone will give, the lowest. So if you see $1,000, $5,000, $10,000 political gifts from a person of color, that's a really good sign you've got a good prospect. 411 is for phone numbers. Manta is a business, small business, a search site that's very cool. You will find home office numbers there like you can't find anyplace else. And Zaba Search is a super creepy website, which I rarely use, but they'll get you home numbers of famous people. And it's really, I don't know where they get their data. If you want to know what creepy looks like, look up yourself on Zaba Search. They'll have your phone number from when you were 14. How they do that, I don't know. I'm not sure I want to know, but that's that. So we're going to have time for questions here, but let's talk about creating inclusiveness. So when someone is brought on board, you can lose them, okay? That's the problem, especially board members, especially new donors, especially, I mean, if you're not a person of color, being brought into an institution where you're the only person of color, you look over your shoulder and you think about, okay, why am I here? If you're there for the cause, of course, that's why you stay, but there's lots of other ways to create more inclusiveness. And your board needs to understand, your staff need to understand that everyone's opinions are valued, everyone's voice is heard. We need to train managers and we need to just train staff around inclusivity. So if you are doing a board recruitment process around diversity, do have an inclusivity training. So when you bring those folks on board, they feel great. They feel, wow, my differences are valued. this environment is very friendly, it's very welcoming, it's very safe, especially when you come up with contrary opinions. A good example of non-inclusiveness is I helped recruit a very wealthy Latina to a board in Los Angeles. No, it was in Texas, excuse me. And she got on the board, and it was 12 people, 10 white men and 1 white woman and her. And they were talking about health outreach into the community. And she told me she initially shut up because they were saying things about reaching out to the Latina community that were culturally inept. That was her word, inept. So she didn't say anything in her first board meeting. But then the board chair came back to her and asked her how she was doing. What did she feel like she was able to speak up? And this woman had the guts to say, yeah, no, I didn't, because everyone was so loud. Everyone was so convinced of their opinions that she did not feel like, okay, what do you think? And so the board chair had the guts to say, you know what, you're right. We did not include you. We just put you on the board, and we didn't look at you and say, what do you think? And so when they finally did, she told them, this is, your approach to the community on this health issue is going to fail, and here's why. And luckily she was right, and they did succeed in reaching out to the community effectively. So make sure and identify underrepresented groups' needs and give people the necessary support and resources they need to feel comfortable, okay? The same thing goes with workers, the same thing goes with board members. Safety, relevance, that they're valued is what you need to show, and show it tangibly, not just in words and lip service. And so remember that to create an inclusive culture when you bring people on board. All right, so Tony, I think we're going to open it up for questions now. Let me make sure I click the right thing here. All right, there we go. And we'll take it from there.
Excellent. Fantastic. Well, wow. Thank you so much, Armando. And like you said, now we'd like to open it up for questions. So please submit any questions or comments you have, pardon me, via the chat box in your GoToWebinar control panel. And meanwhile, we'll get started with a couple of questions we've received so far. So let's see, Armando, is your board and staff leadership currently representative of the community in which you work or not? Is that something that folks need to consider?
Absolutely. Are you asking me personally, or are we talking about this in general?
I would say in general.
Yeah, well, most boards, 93% of boards in the state of California are white. 90% of boards in the United States of America are white. That does not represent the United States of America. You can look at major institutions in Atlanta, in New York, in Chicago, and see, an African-American minister and no African-American wealth or power. Why? Why? There's plenty of African-American power and wealth in those towns. You can go to Florida. There's a major state university in Florida. They have 50 board members, and they do not have one Hispanic Latino person on their board, okay? And I talked to their president about this, and he did not recognize this as an issue, okay, in Florida. And so this is a problem nationally. We have to address it. And when you get diverse, wealthy, powerful people on your board, it's a natural way to attract other diverse donors. There are some institutions that have successfully done this across the country. And so that's a great thing to do.
Excellent. Thank you. Here's another question we got from an attendee. For the African American market, should we start with high wealth groups such as the Links as a start?
You got it. Yeah, that's a good one. I love the Links. They rock. Yeah, no, they're like a women's organization. They're very tight. There's a good peer pressure and social pressure there. There are lots of, like Latino organizations, there are lots of African American mutual self-support business organizations that are hard to get into, but once you're in, it's a good thing because the traditional banks, networking, LinkedIn don't support people of color, so we make our own. and we keep them kind of quiet. And so Links is kind of like that. I have worked with Links in New Orleans before and a couple of other towns, but they're great people.
Wonderful. I wanted to share this with you, Armando. One of our attendees said this is the best training on major gifts that I've ever attended.
Oh,
So I thought you'd like to hear that.
oh,
Um, oh shucks. I
made
wish
it
you
next
were on camera so they could
for God's sake.
see you blush, right? So here's another good question. How do you get a team excited about doing fundraising legwork, such as cold calling, setting up meetings, etc.? And how do you make your requests for the help sound genuine?
Well, it's about money. Giving, major giving is transformational. There's nothing like bringing in a 6, 7-figure, 8-figure gift. It is not easy to do, but it can be done. I've seen lots of small nonprofits with $1 million, $4 million budgets, a 50% increase in their budget through a good major gift. And that's transformational. When you look at this, what frustrates me is a lot of major nonprofits, they understand major giving, they invest in it, they invest in time. Nobody at Harvard or Cornell ever says, boy, you're taking forever to make that major gift happen. They could take 20 years and it's okay. At every other institution out there, people want their money and they want it now. There's a crisis mentality in fundraising. So when it comes to making people understand and love giving, it's because it's your cause. It's not just giving money, it's your program. It's lives saved. Whatever you're doing in terms of your program, think of it exponentially built up to being vastly more effective because you have the money to do it. No, no program, no money. No money, no program.
Right.
So that's what
Yeah.
people don't understand. Fundraising isn't overhead. Fundraising is the power of people to do good.
Excellent. And let's see, we have probably our last question, and then we'll need to move on. This question from an attendee: with declining individual giving, as reported recently, how much do diversity and inclusion weigh in to restore giving, especially for smaller to medium-sized organizations?
It's the wonderful question, whoever asked that. Yes, I've seen the decline, and that's because we're walking past huge piles of money. People are ignoring, they see Latinos as victims overwhelmingly. They see African American individuals as chronically impoverished, which is not true in lots of instances. There's lots. So if you want to expand your donor base, look at your own community. Okay, if you're in Seattle, Washington, and you don't have any Asian donors, how come? You know, well, why is that the case? And that's because you're walking past that community because of cultural. Often there's a lot of money under your feet. You're just not addressing it and you're just not approaching it. So that's, for me, is super crucial. We expand our major donor base outside of the old white man. You know, women alone is a huge source of philanthropy that is often overlooked. We look to their husbands, we look to their partners, unfortunately.
Right. So true. And then I guess this is a pretty quick one. So let's go ahead and address this, and then we'll move on. Uh, Attendee wanting to know, why did the slide say that the prospect list should never be emailed?
Okay, so before I address that, it's a very relevant question. The bottom link URL there is webinar recordings on some of the topics I talked about. Please investigate that. And there's my email for questions. So the reason you don't share your list is because, let's say you take your list and you email it to a former board member, and it's full of your prospect research list of people that are, people who you want to approach. So that person will keep that list and it'll be their Little League fundraising list next month. People will share that list because there's a bunch of rich people on it, especially if you're foolish enough to put contact information on there. Please don't do that. But that's your property. You paid and worked for that list of prospect research leads. So why would you give it to somebody else who may share it with another nonprofit? So it's a way to lose your information. That's why.
Perfect. Thanks for explaining that. So again, like Armando said, right here on the screen is all of his contact information. You'll also receive this information when you get the slide deck and a follow-up email in the next few days. So lastly, Armando, what is the most important takeaway that you'd like to give our webinar participants today?
Well, it's two things. Do your research, fund actual real prospect research, and use it to diversify your board of directors. Those two things alone will take you halfway there.
Excellent. Again, Armando, just amazing information, and we can tell from the feedback we're getting already how much our participants have enjoyed this conversation and the wealth of information you've shared.
Well, Sanford Institute rocks for doing this. A lot of other institutions in the similar vein won't do this. Sanford's excellent.
Wonderful. Thank you for saying that.
No problem. Okay, thank you.
Sure, I was trying to move on to the next screen here, a little bit of a delay. So let's see. So make sure that you join us for our next webinar on July 17th, Approaching the Prospective Donor, Step 3 of the cause selling cycle. Make sure that you register today for that. So again, thank you to our audience for your time and participation. To help us continue to improve our monthly webinar series and ensure we are providing value to our audience, please take a few minutes to complete our survey. In closing, enjoy the rest of your day, and thank you for all that you do to better the communities in which we live, work, and play. Have a great day.
Have a great day, folks.